So here are the waves inside. Let's get interested in the waves inside. We need to talk about these one by one. So we're not just always saying energy, there's energy, you're blocked, there's no energy, there's a lot of energy. Coming into a vocabulary, what is delta? Super slow, 1 to 4 hertz. When does delta show up mostly? Delta shows up in here. It's right here in what's called SWS, or slow wave sleep. So when you go to bed, after maybe 15 to 20 minutes before you're able to go into the first REM, you need to die. Stage 4, it's usually called N3 or non-REM 3. Over here it's called stage 4. Slow wave sleep is the lowest and slowest vibration you would experience throughout the day. It's when you surrender. It's when you say, I don't care anymore. I don't want to think. I don't want to be here. You just die. You go into the closest to death every day in slow wave sleep. And that's when delta starts to show up.
Is it also a reason to sleep, to go actually there?
You look at this, you need more non-REM in the first 2 stages. So we mentioned that it dominates slow wave sleep. It normally shows up more in the right brain. It's more right hemisphere brain dominant. So it actually becomes a problem when it shows up in the left brain. Do you know what happens when delta shows up in the left brain when you're awake? That's called ADHD. You cannot pay attention because delta is not good at focus. It's good at killing you. It's good at spreading out attention, so you can't be here. You need to be totally like in the absolute present moment. So you don't need it. You don't want it when you're awake, supposedly, but in our work, you're actually training the brain to be able to hold delta even whilst you're awake without losing focus. That's part of the training. So that's old data. A lot of people going into this work, you are actually emitting delta, and you know when you're not there. You know when you're not present. You're not able to hold the same delta, so you have to go to sleep now.
Could it be that that state of being in delta awake yet focused? Because I'm expert in going to delta awake.
Okay, GABA we'll talk about more. GABA, I don't want to talk about it too much now, but remember we talked about stimulants and depressants. What are the internal stimulants in the body? What is the upper chemicals? Dopamine is one. Adrenaline is the other. What is the most common? What is the most common stimulant chemical? No, that helps you to relax. What is the most common excitatory chemical in the brain? It's called glutamate. And what slows down glutamate is GABA. GABA facilitates learning, the conversion of short-term memory into long-term memory. GABA inhibits. Glutamate excites. So when you have too much glutamate in your system, it becomes poisonous. You can die. So GABA's job is to slow you down, and that normally happens for most people in slow wave sleep. Excess in wake results in ADHD and learning disability. So this might be important for parents or teachers or those involved with children. Next is theta.
Can you just repeat once? You mentioned something long memory and short memory.
The conversion of short to long-term memory happens in slow wave sleep, which is a delta state. Short-term to long-term memory. Okay, this is interesting. Theta is prominent in young children. In adults, it goes away. And when it does show up, it still leads to ADHD. Or when you go to sleep or when you go into meditation. Theta normally shows up in the parts of the brain that facilitates memory. That's called the hippocampus, but also the emotional parts, the amygdala. That is going to be important later on. So now you can map that. It's in the temporal lobe, somewhere in the middle part of the brain. They are sinusoidal. They're sine waves, as much as it could be. And as mentioned, in adults, theta that shows up in the frontal lobe will lead to feeling scattered, feeling spacey, feeling like you're not here, you're not present, and you're having a hard time paying attention. So when people are anxious, theta goes away. You can see why we're talking about this, because when we bring out the EEG, then you can check it out. Okay, like how is this person theta reflected in terms of this sound, that body position, and so on and so forth. Let's go to alpha now. 8 to 12 hertz. Alpha is more right hemisphere dominant. A lot of it emerges in the occipital lobe. It's somewhere usually between the thalamus and the occipital. It usually shows up when you are kind of daydreaming. You need to be relaxed in order for alpha to be there. So when you're working, alpha is usually not present.
When you're studying, isn't it alpha too?
It helps you to have alpha there, but most of the time when people are anxious, they can't hold alpha. That's why earlier we said the easiest way to raise your alpha levels is to close your eyes. As soon as you close your eyes, you'll notice it in the EEG, alpha will jump up. Because you're receiving too much stimulus when the eyes are open. When you're not receiving so much stimulus, the gating mechanism starts to increase.
That's why Kundalini yoga is always done with eyes closed.
Yeah.
So, purple introversy.
It's the thing that goes down.
What was your question?
In Kundalini yoga, she said, like often the training is you need to close your eyes.
It's always this eyes closed. So you're prone to introverse instead of extroversy.
Okay, it says here alpha diminishes during sleep onset while focusing on tasks. When you're focused on your task, it goes away, which is to validate what you said. And when you grow old, it naturally just decreases. So you get more and more, less and less relaxed, maybe. Its function is to, like we said, to gate, to allow you to not have to receive the information you don't need. That's alpha's main function, to inhibit the unnecessary data that is, like being splattered. And let's say you're in an airport, there's so much you don't need there, or a bus station, or a Starbucks. So alpha actually helps to gate. So when you start working with music and then you start studying what would allow alpha to come through, be somewhere not so fast, but not too slow, because delta would just make you go to sleep. Alpha would be somewhere in the middle. Okay, helps in resource allocation and task sequences. Now here's what's interesting. Let me introduce you to a mysterious wave we know for sure is implicated in the inner dance process. It's called mu. Notice how interesting it is that it's the same Hertz level as alpha. 7.5 to 12. Alpha is the same. It's around 7 to 12. 12.5. So it's actually alpha wave, but it's happening somewhere else. It's happening somewhere between your ears. The alpha wave is implicated with what's called the mirror neuron system. Do any of you know what the mirror neuron system is?
When we mimic what the
Yes.
person is doing, and the children do it all the time.
Yes, yes. It's this interesting phenomenon that, let's say, you're watching someone eating a hamburger. Just by watching that person, you light up the part of the brain that's eating a hamburger. That's how you learn. You have to mirror what is happening outside before you're able to even perform it with your motor circuits. So the mu wave helps you to achieve that mirroring system, yet still to gate the sensory stimulus. And a lot of that activates in dream states. So the mu wave opens up quite hugely and radically in the inner dance. When your body's moving, you're actually exhibiting mu wave properties. It's helping you to process information in a certain way. Normally, mu wave needs to be balanced in order for not to get overwhelmed. There's one particular disorder where the mu wave isn't functioning properly. And then the mirror neuron system then goes really wild. What disorder is that? That's called autism. So in inner dance, you actually bring people into autistic tendencies. Autism is genius. It's the ability to not gate information. It's a disorder that's founded in low latent inhibition where the network of images, the iconic network, the network of sounds, the echoic network, the network of words, the semantic network explodes. So to an autistic, a word is not a word. They're so hypersensitive. Their mapping extends so far, reaching incredible distances, that they need to be in special surroundings to not be triggered. So when you're doing trigger mechanisms in inner dance, you're actually exhibiting autistic elements that could lead to genius, but also could lead to hypersensitivity. And it's something to do with the mu wave, which happens in the temporal lobe, somewhere between the ears, the auditory cortex. When you heighten sensitivity in the auditory cortex, you're allowing the mu wave to jump up.
And inner dance is done to autistic people.
Okay, let me give you an interesting story. I think that's an interesting question, but I have an interesting angle to that. I was invited to Nepal after the big earthquake that happened many years ago to bring healing. I think that's the moment where I did the most inner dances to the most people in a small amount of time. Like, it was so explosive. Like, so many rooms, hundreds at a time, people going into inner dance. It was really deep. I was invited to do inner dance with the autism school in Kathmandu. And I gave it a thought. I will do a session and a talk to the parents. Because what I would like them to experience is what is it like inside their child's mind. So I took them into an inner dance and I made the parents autistic. And they went into the journey and then they saw the colors and oh, okay, I understand now. There's nothing wrong with them. There's something wrong with me. I should just leave them alone because they're not actually a problem. They're exhibiting genius. In the cases where we have provided the playlist for autistic children, they love it because you're providing this environment where they can do hyper processing. It's called hyper priming. Normally when we are thinking in a linear way, we're direct priming, where this one goes to that, it's related to this one in a very linear way. In a hyper priming situation, everything connects to each other, and that's how autistics function. So they need the playlist as a background environment to allow them to hold the entire network when the parents are being too linear. They're just feeling the fear. They're feeling the linearity. And autistics are not like that. They're not built like that. So there's a projection there happening where they're being forced to feel in ways that they're not really designed to feel. So that's the mu wave. Okay, let's go to beta. This is kind of obvious and expected that beta, the thinking brain state, would be where? Of course, it would be in the left side of the brain, because that's really good at linear thinking, and that helps you to really understand what beta frequency means. Beta is worrying. Beta is focus, but it's definitely about anxiety, worrying, sequencing things that they need to be done always in a certain way, in a certain order. So that usually happens in the left hemisphere, and when that starts to bleed into the right, that becomes implicated with mania. It's too much to hold it in the non-sequential part of the brain. It can also happen in higher temporal, like superior temporal lobe area, where people can't sleep. If you can't let go of beta frequencies during the sleep stages, that leads to sleep deprivation. People can't sleep. So that really needs to die down. That's what needs to go away during the sleep stages. If that's there, people can't go into deep sleep. They get woken up very easily, or they cannot sleep at all. So obviously, if you drink coffee past sunset, you're going to exhibit beta brainwaves. So take this, a lot of music that facilitators use actually bring out beta quite a bit. Beta does have its uses, but try not to go with the normal beats that a lot of techno music has. It might feel really good in the body, but a lot of that is beta based. It still will get people stuck in their minds, even if they're feeling a lot of pulsations in their body. Central area, it leads to migraines. What this says, low beta is responsible for musing thought, like idle thought. Then low beta is okay. It's not really seen as a toxic brain state. Anxiety, alertness, problem solving, excitement, reward, and anticipation. So dopamine, basically. Dopamine does all that. And it usually is not spread out throughout the brain. It's localized. You see it usually in focal regions of the brain. It doesn't show up too hugely. I think if it shows up as a global spread, that's migraine.
Great question.
Yes.
Which frequency will stimulate the production of the dopamine?
Say it again, louder.
Which frequency will stimulate
That
the
one.
most?
Beta.
Beta.
Okay. Beta is good for putting things in order. One interesting thing in the human is we have the most contralateralized brain of all species. Meaning, contralateral means opposing sides. Music exists on one side of the brain, and language exists on the other side of the brain. Animals don't contralateralize the brain like that. So beta state is going to be a lot more prominent in humans than other animals, because we needed it for language. We needed it to put things in order. We needed it to organize things, to create sequences, to be aware of time. Animals don't care about yesterday. They don't anticipate tomorrow, and thus they don't work with beta as much as we do. Beta is responsible for time. And that actually got centralized to one side of your brain.
This may be a silly question, but so is it like external factors that happen and then beta would move to the middle and then you get migraine? Or have they tested migraines and seen that the beta is not part, for example?
They tested it and they saw that, yeah, most
So it moves
most of
out.
the time beta, yeah. We can check it out with the EEG as well, because the EEG looks at left and right and front and back. Let's go to gamma to cap it off. 30 to 100 hertz. Anything above 100 hertz would be called high oscillating frequency. So we're not listing it here, but it's interesting to know that you can actually go beyond gamma at one point, and that's when. Okay, I have a question. Has anyone had a journey, a really deep journey, where you're not even breathing anymore? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So one of the common big retreat, deep journey experiences, people aren't breathing. And then they notice it, like, when's the last time I inhaled? It's been minutes. So it gets to a point where you're not even needing oxygen to be delivered from the lungs and to the heart. You're actually breathing on a cellular level. And you're in a deep state of energy conservation. That's when you're not in this dimension anymore. That is the most still. That is the deepest state. That's when high oscillating frequencies are now emitting, and it's spreading across the whole central and peripheral nervous system. So don't be scared of raising the vibration. If you're hitting a big middle point, it's good for emotions, it's good for planning, but you want to take them to the other side? Find tools that brings them there, to that white space or black hole, depending on how you want to see it.
We cannot do the inner dance on our own.
That is something we found to be totally not true. The best teacher that pushed us to demonstrate this was COVID-19. Because in the pandemic, people could not fly to Palawan, and then we had to do these online courses because people couldn't fly. Then we started to construct the playlists at home. And then when we sent them over to people, many were shocked that the journeys went even deeper when they were alone, at home, in the rooms, facilitating themselves. And so that led to the production from last year of what are called sleep playlists. This is the most exciting in terms of medicine and clinical psychology. Taking the wave that we draw out that mimics the sleep stages that you call the inner dance playlist, because we have understood it for so long now that we're actually mimicking the journey into REM. What would happen if you played that playlist when people are sleeping anyhow? And the results were twice or more than when people are awake. In children who had so many emotional, physiological, psychological problems, we were shocked at what the parents were saying. Like, all the boxes that says, like, this is a problem, they just kept getting ticked off. And then it started to get shared across the world. So now we're receiving the data. The doctors are now working with it. The psychologists are now working with it. It's the next one. So taking that question, taking that even deeper. If you're going to sleep anyway, why don't you do work? Why don't you conduct work? So we're working with, let's say, call centers in the Philippines. The Philippines is one of the call center capitals in the world. A call center is when people are awake in the graveyard shift. India and the Philippines kind of hold that. So we're giving them the sleep playlists because they're not sleeping, and like the data is really getting more and more interesting. So we will send these sleep playlists to you guys. You can design your own upon your interest and just see. We're now constructing an app for doctors and psychologists, and later on for facilitators, healers, teachers, just to see what would happen. We need to do research on that.
There's many people who come to the sessions or end up in this space and then when they experience the inner dance session, they're like, oh, I've done this before, like what Amanda was sharing, that when she went to her first sessions, it's like, is it possible that I know this already? So like question, can we do it alone, or I was alone when this inner dance happened, and many people say the same. Kind of holding multiple truths at the same time in this space, where if the point is to create conditions where something, this inner dance happens, it can be alone or together, but what are the conditions when we are alone when it happens, and what are the conditions when we are together? But both are equally possible depending on the conditions where you are at in your life. Like some people experience it when they are in an accident, or when something really traumatic happens in their life, or some people as kids, and then they remember, they come to the session, they're like, oh no, I did this when I was 5 years old, but I forgot, and now I remember again. And that's what they call their inner dance. So it's I feel it could be something very natural that all of us can do together or alone, but we just, it's like a remembrance.
It's not funny you know about it, but when it happened to me in 2018, I had no clue that what inner dance was, and it happened spontaneously. So it scared me.
Yeah.
So because it was lasting like more than an hour, and I couldn't stop the process. So you ask yourself what's going on with this. So
what we're doing now is we're almost normalizing it so that it becomes part of every day. You can either just like, you know, like it's weird to.
It's gonna.
No, I think it's okay. It's not like.
very strong.
Yeah. It's okay.
It's
okay. I don't think there's a big difference anymore. I think yesterday, because it was late in the afternoon, and that seems to be helping. So as we see here, gamma is more spread out. It's not localized. It's the opposite of beta. It does usually show up during REM state or hyper states of consciousness. It is an inner dance state to experience gamma. So when we do say raising vibration, for those who use the term, gamma is Kundalini. There's a really beautiful story from India that would be good to bring up. That's not the scientific context, but the traditional context. And you guys might be able to use this. The story goes that corpse is Shava. The dead body is Shava. That's why Shavasana is honoring Shava. And it's only when Shava achieves that position when Shakti can now channel through. And you can use the metaphor of the sleep stages to understand Shava is slow wave sleep, non-REM 3 state. And when Shakti can now pass through, do you know what happens? Shava jumps up and starts to dance. And now his name is Shiva. So what's actually dancing Shiva is the energy passing through. It's Shakti. So it's Shakti. It's gamma state. It's HOF. It's high oscillating frequency. Passing through death. Passing through the corpse. But I think if the corpse loses delta, then the movement will be lost and you go back to beta. Isn't that a beautiful story?
The awakening of Shakti, would that be the rising of gamma?
The corpse needs to surrender for Shakti to enter through. Otherwise, the high vibrations cannot enter. So they need to work with each other. The dead masculine, the masculine needs to surrender fully. And normally people ask, is the masculine still or is it like moving? Is the feminine stillness or is it movement? In this model, Shakti is actually very fast vibration. The masculine is total stillness. So for Shakti to enter, Shava needs to let go.
say Shiva Shakti,
Mm.
which is a normalized
Yeah.
partner
Mm.
words,
Mm.
now that's actually a redundancy.
Yeah, because it's just one. Shiva is Shakti moving through Shava. They're not separate. So the god of the dance is, in fact, the feminine moving through the masculine that's just the channel. And then when you study the circadian rhythms, oh my God, this is the dream state. It's totally modeled in the sleep stages. And we're learning to mimic that while people are awake by getting people to surrender into REM, into horizontal eyes closed position. The release of melatonin brings them into the dream even while they're awake through entrainment. I guess I would still need to read this. Gamma helps in the binding and the coherence of unified perception. Gamma helps you to hold all the information together as one whole. In that sense, it's very responsible for learning. Here's another important thing. Faster oscillations allow for greater distance communication across the network. Let me explain this because this is important. When you dream, what is the dream like? Is it boring or is it always going to be weird? Usually if it's normal, it wouldn't even be considered a dream. It's just like you thinking. So there needs to be very special conditions in terms of circuitry and chemistry that maybe now is the time to bring it up. There are certain chemical markings or states that's very, very different between when you're awake and when you're asleep and when you're asleep in REM. Here's what you're doing. You're doing something radical. According to psychology, there are only 3 basic states of consciousness. That would be wake state, non-REM sleep, and REM sleep. You're introducing a 4th, and that's called wake REM. That's not really mapped out. It's understood to be a reality, but it shows up when there are problems, like these diagnoses, like schizophrenia, like psychosis, like autism, when low latent inhibition is at work.
Hi, so is it like the inner down state, would it be similar to lucid dream?
Yes, it's wake REM. This is what we're mapping out. We're putting out there that there's another state of consciousness, a 4th one, and it's called wake REM. So you might get interested in mappings like this. This one's hard to read because it's kind of dark. We can just send you a copy of this if you have a hard time copying it down. Oxytocin, dopamine, cortisol, serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, glutamate, GABA, acetylcholine, growth hormone, orexin, histamine, melatonin, prolactin we added. There needs to be moments when the uppers need to be turned on and downers need to go down. Don't get confused by this. I want to bring up just 2 neurotransmitters that would be interesting in the dream state. There are 2 neurotransmitters that need to shut down when people go into the REM state. Let's go over what those are and why do they need to be theoretically off. The first one would be norepinephrine. Okay, norepinephrine is responsible for managing stress. Norepinephrine is the epinephrine in the brain. Epinephrine is normally the epinephrine of the body. The other one is serotonin. That's surprising. Serotonin is supposed to relax you. It's supposed to bring about satisfaction and happiness. That's the one we want to look at. Why Does serotonin shut down during REM state?
Does it produces sequences?
Yes. It makes you emotional. It binds you to other people. It creates social bonds. And when you're dreaming, you cannot have that. Because when you're attached to people, ideas, situations, it doesn't allow information to travel far distances. Do you understand what I mean? You can't achieve weird when serotonin is up. So when you are managing your journey, when you're putting in too much emotional attaching elements, people won't be able to travel far. For people to travel far distances, gamma is responsible for allowing neurons to create long-range synaptic connections. Otherwise, you're actually still on beta mode. So serotonin needs to go down. That's interesting. That's something you want to study. You want to bring people into greater distances. You want to manage emotions not too heavily on some stages of the journey. Otherwise, they will not see far.
So how would that play along with when you provide service to family members, to people that you are
Yes,
emotionally
exactly.
attached to?
There has to be distance. There has to be objectivity so that transference. We need to study what's happening in the dream in the first place to see what's the benefit of that. So usually this is when I bring up some of the scientists and geniuses that understood the power of brain states. Like Einstein had a very interesting habit when he got stuck with some problems that he couldn't think through because logic could only go so far. He had this practice. He would sit in a comfortable sofa and then he would hold a metallic object, usually a fork. And then he would hold a big metal plate. And then he would hold the problem there and then he would relax. And then as he falls asleep, at one point, he's already asleep, the fork would drop. And then he would wake up. And whilst he is near the REM state, he'll say, oh, I see it. He's able to create connections that are unlikely and travel farther distances. So can you see what REM state does? It's like, oh, E is equal to mc squared. Have you had these experiences where you wake up and then, oh wait, I have it.
Well,
And then you can't hold it.
happens for me right before I fall asleep.
Yeah,
I solve all my
onset.
problems.
Yeah, there you go. So Benjamin Franklin, Leonardo da Vinci, they were doing this. Francis Bacon, they were doing this. They were using the power of REM state in order to see far. It's incredible.
I've had to get up in the middle of the night and put together
Yeah, write it
the
down.
whole data.
Insight. Insight. It's pretty cool though. When you put the dots together that, okay, serotonin, okay, norepinephrine, okay, dopamine, balance them all. GABA. Learning how these mechanisms work will allow you to bring about like a learning state eventually.
The REM state is achieved by TM, transcendental meditation.
Because they found out about these too.
The REM state is achieved through via TM, that transcendental meditation.
And inner dance and a lot of other things that we're doing. Okay, here's the problem. Okay, having said these, maybe it's time to reveal some really important notes that you want to take with you. If you come here and you take just a few notes, here are some really important ones. Go, go, go. Notes.
Register, we're giving the...
Yes, they're all recorded. You'll watch them over and over again if you need to.
Can you just repeat on this? You said focus on two. Serotonin.
Serotonin and norepinephrine are the ones that go totally zero during
Oh,
REM.
the both of them. Both.
Yeah, during REM. Because we are only mimicking REM in a lot of the inner dances and Kundalini and whatever sessions you call it, norepinephrine and serotonin are up. Because you're also exhibiting some aspects of REM state. One of the things that cannot be turned on when you're dreaming or sleeping at all is the prefrontal cortex. Do you know what happens when the prefrontal cortex turns on while you're dreaming? That's called lucid dreaming. You want to experience lucid dreaming, you need to turn on the prefrontal cortex whilst still keeping gamma, delta, the occipital, all the other lobes be
Activated.
yes.
Are we still in REM sleep?
If you can hold the vibrations that normally does shut down when you're in beta state, and beta happens in the prefrontal cortex, which is good at paying attention. So I think that's what we're learning, how to pay attention but still dreaming. Being able to establish short connections, which is what logic is about, and dream is about weird, unlikely, super far distance connections. If you want to contextualize this more, let's go into these necessary insights that belong in science and belong in the spiritual process. It goes into addiction. It goes into dopamine. What does dopamine do? What makes dopamine dangerous? Now, we don't want to demonize dopamine because dopamine is important. The sickness or the disorder that is mostly to do when dopamine functions go down is Parkinson's. So if you want to work on someone with Parkinson's, the work that we do is super effective. Because when you expose people to this kind of music, dopamine will shoot up. So dopamine is important. Dopamine helps you to manage your body movements, so you're focused. The prefrontal cortex stays focused with dopamine because you're anticipating, you're living in linear time. Emotions are managed by dopamine and memory is managed by dopamine. So when dopamine goes weird, a lot of those go down. And then you reroute dopamine and then you're able to come to other modes of consciousness. When dopamine goes up and is too high, one thing that gets inhibited is serotonin. So let's look at serotonin. Dopamine is addictive. It's very short term. Dopamine is felt in the body. It's very visceral. You feel it down here. It inspires greed, taking. It's usually experienced alone, not socially, like when people binge. And then the brain always says, I want more. It's never enough. There's always this, craving. And then too much leads to addiction, as is obvious. Serotonin is the opposite. So when you look at the top, you can see the pathways. The dopamine pathways are very limited. They only reach out to 5 to 7 centers. You look at serotonin, it spreads out through many regions. There are many receptors throughout the whole brain. Now, serotonin is not about pleasure, it's about happiness. When you receive serotonin, the effect is long term. It's not short term like dopamine. It's ethereal. It's felt above the neck. You don't feel it in the body. Serotonin, you get the high here. It inspires generosity. It inspires giving. And it's generally experienced in social environments where the situations are shared with other people. Friends, family members, and when you receive it, you say, okay, I'm good now. I feel okay now. I've had enough. I don't need more. So when you see people showing up in the work and they're, no, I need more, then you need to consider, am I working on a dopaminergic pathway or a serotonergic pathway? Too little leads to mood disorders, normally depression. So this is interesting that when dopamine is active, dopamine actually inhibits serotonin. chemically. It's very strange. When dopamine is high, serotonin goes down. So they normally inhibit each other. This one goes up, this one goes down. I want to believe that it's actually possible to bring both up. But you need to bring this beyond addictive processes. So
it's interesting because people are treated with ayahuasca, which increases stimulates
So-
dopamine immediately.
yeah.
Immediate results.
Yeah.
But then the effect of ayahuasca is rather lengthy, so it's considered like therapy.
Yeah.
But people get addicted to that as well.
Yeah. Anything that creates reliance from an outside agency to begin with. What we probably would think about these is that we can simulate or mimic the effects of what would be more organic when we approach this slowly, not through, like boom, you can have it now. So it doesn't mean it's not going to help. It's maybe there to help people realize that this is possible, but if it was induced inorganically, then the addiction would naturally be there because I achieved it through an external agent and it's not coming from inside. So what we're doing is a little bit nearer because it's vibratory. It's a lot of people say this is more powerful than ayahuasca to begin with. That's something we've heard over and over again, but the effects are much more long lasting for
It's ecological.
one reason or another.
It's totally ecological.
Yeah, exactly. From internal mechanisms.
Breathwork as well. Yeah.
It's not as messy.
The mind's doing it.
So this is not the only thing that we would implicate in terms of dopamine. Dopamine also inhibits another important chemical. It's actually twin chemicals. Dopamine inhibits... Oh, I don't have it. Dopamine inhibits glutamate and GABA. Why is glutamate important? Glutamate facilitates learning, especially when it's coupled with GABA. Do you see my substantiation when I make the claim that dopamine will make you stupid? Because glutamate is what you need to facilitate learning. It allows you to create and sustain circuits. So here's why you would want to hold more and more energy in the what we call the stage 3 or stage 4. Why would you hold the deep in the process? Slow wave sleep, N3 stage, delta.
The mind's doing that usually.
It's called myelination. You know what myelin is? Myelin is the covering or the sheath that's protecting the synapses that connects the neurons. So when you look at the brain, it's colored gray. But underneath the gray matter is white matter. And that's the part of the brain that's myelinized. So myelin allows the connections to travel as much as 1,000 times faster and longer as compared to if the brain was not myelinized. So when you conduct processes that go very deep, very slow, the connections will strengthen. When you conduct processes that are too short-term, too dopaminergic, the synapses are not myelinized. So that's where dopamine could be dangerous. If you're doping people too much, if you're exposing them too much to patterns that are anticipatory, when they're anticipating, I want more, this is like helping me, you're often giving them what they want but not what they need. So you want to give them rest periods. If it's not going to be in between sessions, it's going to be in the session itself. So a lot of the noisy, the weird, the unexpected elements, the dark, the super low delta sounds helps in the myelination process. So that's why your playlists will change. That's why you're adding more layers. It's because of the white matter in the brain.
Would it be compared to the connective tissue in the fascia?
I'm not able to go there yet. I don't know much about that. Yeah. I'm still here, but let's take that somewhere for sure. Questions? Yeah, so glutamate and GABA balance each other. Glutamate excites, GABA inhibits. Hold those together, you establish learning. There's some complexity here. Let's not talk about that today. We can bring some more up tomorrow, but it's good that we're bringing this up along with a map on the brain waves so that we're building a literacy as to the neural oscillations or the different waveforms that's emanating in the brain. Yes?
We discussed around, and that, there are phases of sleep, that when our brain gets in
Yeah.
this stage. But during the day, there are short periods, really
Yeah.
sort of tiny ones
Yeah.
of REM.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes?
Yes,
Yeah.
totally. It's even interesting to think of it not just in a day. Circadian rhythm is circa diem, about a day. It's never exactly a day. But for those of you who live in Europe especially, you're not just looking at the circadian rhythm, you're talking about the circannual rhythm. So your brain states in December will not look the same as in July. So you want to think about seasons as well. What are the food habits, the drinking habits, the recreation habits of people during winter as opposed to summer? So when you design a process, you want to think about the relationship between the sun and the moon, light and dark, hot and cold. So if you live in Norway, where in December there's no sun at all, would you do the same process? For a lot of you, you experience maybe a first inner dance at 7:30 in the morning. How is that different from like in the afternoon? Some of the most powerful sessions could actually happen at 3 o'clock in the morning because that's when melatonin is the highest. So think about that when you're trying to schedule with your studio when to block time. Are you open at 3 a.m.? Because that's really when the highest REM state is happening. What else is there? Other questions? Okay. This is a lot. It's already quite a lot for you to absorb. It will make you an internal scientist who can start reading your own brains. It will give you a metric so that when you're feeling the energy, you'll start to notice, oh, okay, I never noticed that before. I can actually see the waves. I can feel the waves. I can hear the frequencies. Whereas in the past, I was just like muddying them up in one energy ball. It's just one field. This will give you a chance to structure things as a participant and as a space holder. You won't look at music the same way because you can you can isolate, you can extract. Yes.
As a facilitator, do you know what type of waves we go into as well, or when you're facilitating,
Yes.
do you kind of mirror that
Yeah. Yeah.
also? Not exactly in REM, but
REM is not really a one state, it's a combination of all the other states because each brain wave is already considered a state of consciousness. Like delta would be deep sleep, theta will be drowsy, alpha would be daydreaming, beta would be focused or worrying, and then gamma would be hyper alert. REM is a combination of all of those. So what you're learning is how to bring all those combinations to allow for all those combinations. And they're usually journey based. So one of the most important things to share with you that is a category mistake in many space holders, because if they don't know this, they don't realize that when you design the music, you need to let them pass through this N3. Maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes into the space, drop it. so that they can go into effective REM where they're not holding on to tension. Make that your ritual so that you're not even doing the preparatory stage in the beginning of the session, not over talking, so that you can just input the processing within the journey itself. So what a lot of facilitators do, hyper excited, what they do is they build up. They're so excited to get the feedback that I'm going to build it up, so that, okay, build up, get them to cry, they don't build in the N3 stage. So let it rise, but then drop it somewhere. A little bit after the beginning, after onset of the state, and then build it up.
Do we do that more than once, or is it?
Yes. A more effective journey would be when you have more drops. But what we're doing now is we're not actually working in those models like what you might have seen in the inner dance process in the morning. We inbuilt this deep, slow wave throughout the whole process, so you don't get the drop. The drop is hidden all throughout the process. You don't see the wave anymore because we're holding REM state all throughout. We're not going into non-REM 1, non-REM 2, which is usually when you're beginning to drop in and release. We're just letting people go straight there all at once. So we're making sure that there's always deep delta scattered throughout the whole journey. That's a style. You don't need to do that. So our advice to you, if you have communities that will need the wave, make sure that you hold enough of those drops. Usually the most effects happen in the drop. If you're doing an advanced group, you can hold more variations, more contrasts. If it's like a new group, then limit it to maybe 2 or 3 delta drops. But the more advanced the group, you can experiment with just what it does. Partly is you're giving them a chance to hold duality and say, okay, there's that and then there's that. I don't know what's good anymore and what's bad anymore, and then I'm just going to choose everything. It will get to a point where it doesn't matter if you're holding something alive or something deep. They won't know the difference. They're just there. They're not making decisions anymore. That's one of the reasons why that would be interesting. Yes.
In practicality, rise and drop, how would it sound like?
Like an actual sounding of it. I'm stuck. I'm tied.
Technology around.
So I'll build it up. And then I'm going to drop it into maybe India. Okay, let me redo that because there was a space in between and you won't feel the effect so much when the transition is gradual. That's a drop. It needs to be sudden. That reroutes dopamine. But do you see my point in terms of instead of doing the sequencing, time and space. You can either create contrast in time. In time would be in a sequence. What I just did was super fast and then super slow. That's in time. How do I do that in space? Then I just play them at the same time, together. Because you can feel the difference, right? Now that we're demonstrating it. Here is gamma beta. That's gamma beta. And this is without the drone. But let me add the drone, or let's say Buddhist monks. That space. Do you see what I'm trying to say there? You can either hold them in a sequence one by one, and then there would be a contrast when you make the drop. But for you, what would be the difference if you hold them together at the same time in space? That's your choice. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like in the past, inner dance grew out of the sequencing of songs, and then there would be the drop because we didn't have these apps. There were these new iPods in 2008, 2009 with the new touchscreens. There wasn't the app store. There weren't any of these apps, so we would play like a song from an emotional song, and then I would literally jump into Johann Sebastian Bach's Air on the G string. That would be super slow, but I would do it in mid-song. It would be amazing and terrible. It would have to jump.
It's not necessarily
But
either
when you-
or. It can also be both together. You're doing delta all the time and laying on top.
Yeah, that's what we're doing now. We were getting all these complaints. Why are you doing that? Like people who didn't know anything about inner dance, they'd come in, walk into the retreat center, and then we would drop the song. The people who were in it, they were like, "Poof." It would be explosive because the shock would be there. But a lot of people, they hated it. You still need the sequencing technique because you need to create variations. The change happens through contrast, juxtaposition, and paradox. So you do need to be able to move from one vibration to the next. But you also now need to work with more layers, because more layers, more gamma, more delta, more spread, greater distance, less likely connections, more creativity, more directions, like omnidirectionality as opposed to unidirectionality. That's why we're talking about the playlist in this way. That's why the tools are there. You weren't here when we were demonstrating. So she was asking what constitutes a drop. That's a drop. It's like it's an abrupt move that reroutes dopamine from, yeah. Actually, what we were demonstrating in the past is we didn't have a base. It was quite clumsy with the old technology, so that we would stop something that's at a peak point, and then we actually need to work with the gap where the song would slowly start into a meditative, our favorites before body blessing, and I don't actually remember the songs that I used to use, but we would choose what is the sharpest transition. And this energy really spread actually because of that technique. It had something to do with rerouting dopamine circuits through surprise. Because the mind doesn't like that. The mind likes to expect and anticipate what's coming up next. Yeah. Questions? No. Yeah. So it's just helpful. It's just interesting.
I feel like the mind's doing that usually because it's out of fear. It's coming out of
It's control. Yeah. Yeah. There's even this idea of working through genres, whereas in the past, the mind doesn't like to mix things that don't go together. So when the man who invented this, his name's Steve Jobs, came up with this device, when he came up with the iPod, what was his promise? 1,000 songs in your pocket. So that was the first time that we could become eclectic. When you start to mix Beatles with Mozart, with Pavarotti, with U2, that's what we were doing in inner dance. We were taking genres that didn't belong together, and then we were sequencing them in unlikely ways that you would never hear in the radio because that doesn't belong in a playlist. That's what did the journey. Taking them through so many emotions, so many colors, so many textures that don't go together. The energy grew on that. The mind doesn't like to mix up Egypt with San Francisco, but because people were traveling and the internet was there and Facebook was connecting people from all around the world, the brain was going into this REM state, mixing things up. So you can see why these words sequence, layers, they actually mean something structurally in psychology, in philosophy, and linguistics. Yeah, I think I'm full. We'll let you guys absorb this and then we'll go into a session for the afternoon. What time is it?
It's 3. Oh, it's 4.
It's 4, so we've actually put in some serious time in it already. How much break do you need?
4:30 we start and we have 2 hours.
Okay. Yeah. 30 minutes? Swim. Enjoy Turkey. Thank you.